This boy claimed to be George Washington in a past life, and it's one of the most chilling reincarnation cases in history. The year was 2012, a seemingly ordinary Tuesday morning in the quiet, unassuming suburb of Fairfax, Virginia, a place steeped in American history, yet far removed from the grandeur of battlefields and presidential mansions. Here, amongst the manicured lawns and two-story homes, lived the Miller family, Sarah and Tom, a dedicated couple in their late 30s, and their bright-eyed 6-year-old son, Daniel. Their lives, up until that point, were a tapestry woven with the mundane joys of PTA meetings, soccer practices, and the comforting rhythm of suburban life. The scent of freshly cut grass mingled with the distant hum of traffic, punctuated by the chirping of cicadas in the humid summer air. Sounds of playful shouts from neighboring yards often drifted into their open windows, creating a soundtrack of idyllic Americana. Daniel was, by all accounts, a typical American boy. He loved Lego, superheroes, and the occasional spirited debate about which Ninja Turtle was the strongest. His room was a colorful explosion of action figures and crayon masterpieces. He was a sweet, inquisitive child with a mischievous glint in his blue eyes, and his parents adored him. They saw a future for him, perhaps as an engineer, given his fascination with building, or maybe even an astronaut, considering his love for the stars. They never imagined his future would be inextricably linked to a past so profoundly American, so irrevocably historical. The first signs were subtle, easily dismissed as childish imagination. Daniel had always been a solitary player, often engaging in elaborate make-believe games in his backyard, his voice echoing with commands and pronouncements. Sarah would sometimes overhear him muttering about redcoats and crossing the river, chalking it up to a vivid imagination fueled by history books they'd read together about the Revolutionary War. But then, the details started to become unnervingly precise. One evening, while watching a documentary about colonial America, a segment on uniforms played. Daniel, who had been quietly coloring, suddenly looked up, a furrow in his brow. "That's not right," he declared, pointing to the screen. The buttons on the Hessians' coats were pewter, not brass, and the stitching on their cuffs was different depending on their regiment. Tom, a history enthusiast himself, was stunned. He'd never discussed such minute details with Daniel. He brushed it off. Perhaps Daniel had overheard something at school, but a seed of unease had been planted. Weeks later, during a family trip to Mount Vernon, Daniel's behavior grew even stranger. As they walked through the meticulously preserved estate, he began to offer unsolicited commentary. "The cherry tree wasn't here," he stated, pointing to a sapling near the house. "It was closer to the west garden, and the view from the piazza. It used to be much clearer before the trees grew so tall." His parents exchanged bewildered glances. How could a 6-year-old know such things? He hadn't read any detailed histories of Mount Vernon, let alone studied its landscaping changes over centuries. The air around them seemed to thicken with a palpable tension, a sense of something profound lurking just beneath the surface of their ordinary lives. The chilling details escalated. He would sometimes wake up screaming from nightmares not of monsters, but of cannon fire and the cries of wounded men. He spoke of a Martha, with a tenderness and longing that felt profoundly out of place for a child his age. He began to draw intricate maps, not of their neighborhood, but of battle formations, complete with arrows indicating troop movements and fortifications. He'd label them with names like Valley Forge and Yorktown, places he'd only briefly encountered in children's history books. The art was too complex, the details too accurate, for a child of 6. His innocent blue eyes would sometimes gaze into the distance, a world-weary expression on his face that sent shivers down Sarah's spine. The revelation came on a rainy afternoon, the kind of day that forces introspection. Daniel was building a fort out of blankets and pillows in the living room. Sarah was reading, and Tom was attempting to fix a leaky faucet. Suddenly, Daniel emerged from his blanket fort, his small frame somehow radiating an unexpected gravitas. His voice, usually light and playful, was deep, almost resonant. "I remember the cold," he said, his eyes fixed on some unseen point beyond the living room window. The biting wind at Valley Forge, the hunger, the despair in the men's eyes, but also their unwavering spirit. Sarah slowly lowered her book, her heart beginning to pound. "What are you talking about, sweetie?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Daniel turned to her, his gaze unwavering. "I was there. I led them. I was George Washington." Silence descended upon the room, heavy and suffocating. Tom, who had just entered, tools in hand, dropped a wrench with a clang that echoed unnaturally loud. Sarah felt a cold dread creep up her spine. This wasn't a game. The conviction in Daniel's voice, the depth of his memories, the utter certainty in his eyes, it was terrifying. "George Washington?" Tom finally managed, his voice strained. "Daniel, you're a little boy. George Washington lived a long, long time ago." "I know," Daniel replied, a hint of sadness in his voice. "I died, but I came back. There's so much I need to tell you, about the future, about this nation." He then proceeded to recount details of Washington's life that were utterly impossible for him to know. He spoke of the specific challenges of drafting the Constitution, the political machinations of the early republic, and even intimate details of his relationship with Martha. He described the pain of his false teeth, the weight of command, and the constant struggle to unite a fledgling nation. He even spoke in an archaic cadence at times, using phrases like perchance and verily. His parents, reeling from the shock, could only listen in stunned silence, a whirlwind of fear, wonder, and utter disbelief swirling within them. The air in their cozy living room, usually so warm and familiar, now felt charged with an almost supernatural energy. If this shocks you so far, subscribe and tell us in the comments what you think about reincarnation. The Miller family's initial reaction was a desperate search for rational explanations. Sarah scoured the internet, convinced Daniel was an indigo child or a savant with an uncanny ability to absorb historical facts. Tom, ever the pragmatist, considered a rare psychological condition. They consulted their pediatrician who, after a thorough examination, found Daniel to be perfectly healthy, albeit unusually articulate for his age. But as Daniel continued to spontaneously share increasingly obscure and accurate historical information, they knew they needed help beyond conventional medicine. Word inevitably began to spread. First within their close-knit community, then through local news channels hungry for sensational stories. Soon, a host of outsiders descended upon the Miller home. Dr. Eleanor Vance, a renowned parapsychologist specializing in past life regression. Professor Arthur Davies, a meticulous historian from a prestigious university, and even Father Michael, a sympathetic but skeptical priest from their local parish. The media circus was relentless, cameras flashing, microphones thrusting, eager to capture a glimpse of the reincarnated president. The investigators approached Daniel with a mixture of skepticism and profound curiosity. Dr. Vance employed subtle psychological techniques, attempting to coax out any fabrication or delusion. Professor Davies, armed with obscure historical texts and forgotten documents, peppered Daniel with questions designed to trip him up. Father Michael, with a gentle demeanor, sought to understand the spiritual implications of such a claim. The tests were astonishing. Professor Davies presented Daniel with a series of unlabeled engravings of colonial-era uniforms, asking him to identify the regiments. Daniel, without hesitation, correctly named each one, even pointing out subtle distinctions in the buttons and epaulets that only a seasoned historian would recognize. He was shown a map of the Battle of Trenton, but it was a deliberate forgery with several inaccuracies. Daniel immediately spotted them, correcting the positioning of artillery batteries and the path of the Hessian retreat. General Rahl's men would never have been positioned so carelessly, he declared, his youthful voice imbued with a surprising authority. Dr. Vance attempted guided imagery, gently leading Daniel through scenarios from Washington's life. Daniel responded not with childlike fantasies, but with vivid, detailed recollections, complete with emotional nuances that resonated with known historical accounts. He spoke of the crushing weight of responsibility, the moments of doubt, and the profound love for his country. He even described the taste of dried venison and hardtack, the smell of gunpowder, and the feel of rough homespun fabric against his skin. Father Michael, initially the most skeptical, was visibly shaken when Daniel, unprompted, recited passages from Washington's farewell address with an understanding and emotional depth that transcended rote memorization. "It was a warning," Daniel explained, his young face etched with an ancient weariness, "against factionalism, against foreign entanglements, against the very divisions that threaten the Republic still." The priest, a man of unwavering faith, found himself questioning the very foundations of his understanding of life and death. The ultimate climax, the moment that shattered all remaining doubt for many, came during a televised interview with a prominent historian, Dr. Evelyn Reed. She was a formidable woman, known for her staunch empiricism and her public disdain for anything smacking of the paranormal. The interview was taking place in the Millers' living room, a palpable tension filling the air. Dr. Reed, with a condescending smirk, pulled out a small, tarnished silver locket from her pocket. "Daniel," she began, her voice dripping with skepticism, "can you tell me what this is?" Daniel's eyes widened. He reached out a small trembling hand and gently took the locket. His expression shifted, a profound sadness clouding his features. "This," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion, "this belonged to Martha. She gave it to me before the war. It holds a lock of her hair, and etched on the back, a tiny sprig of laurel." Dr. Reed's jaw dropped. The locket had been a family heirloom, passed down through generations of her ancestors, who were distant relatives of Martha Washington. Its existence and the intricate details Daniel described were known only to a handful of historians and the Reed family. The laurel sprig was so tiny, almost imperceptible to the naked eye, and its meaning, a symbol of victory and honor, was deeply personal to Washington. But Daniel wasn't finished. He held the locket to his ear, his eyes closed. "There's a hidden compartment," he murmured, his voice now barely audible. "A secret message, a small piece of parchment folded many times. It speaks of a hidden cache, a place where I kept important documents away from prying eyes during the winter at Valley Forge." He then proceeded to describe the exact location, beneath a loose hearthstone in a specific forgotten outbuilding on the grounds of a now private estate that had once been part of the Valley Forge encampment, an outbuilding not even widely known to exist. He described the pattern of the bricks, the specific shade of mortar, and the unique, almost imperceptible scratch mark on the stone that indicated its looseness. The revelation sent shockwaves through the historical community. Dr. Reed, utterly flabbergasted, immediately dispatched a team of historians and archaeologists to the specified location. Days later, amidst much media fanfare, the team confirmed Daniel's impossible claim. Beneath the very hearthstone he had described, in the forgotten outbuilding, they found a small iron box. Inside, carefully preserved despite the passage of centuries, were several personal letters from Washington to Martha, documents outlining his private thoughts on military strategy, and a beautifully rendered, never-before-seen map of an unexecuted flanking maneuver intended for the Battle of Germantown. The discovery was monumental, a treasure trove of historical insight that completely rewrote certain aspects of early American history. It was irrefutable, undeniable proof. The aftermath was nothing short of a global phenomenon. Daniel Miller, the quiet 6-year-old, became a living legend. The scientific community grappled with the implications, their empirical worldviews shattered by the undeniable evidence. Religious leaders debated the theological implications of reincarnation within various doctrines. Historians began to re-evaluate countless historical accounts, now viewing them through the prism of a potentially reincarnated source. The Miller family's quiet suburban life was irrevocably altered, their home a constant hub of academic inquiry and media attention. Daniel, through it all, remained remarkably grounded, though his youthful innocence was now tinged with an ancient wisdom. He often spoke of the burdens of leadership, the fragility of democracy, and the enduring spirit of the American people. He never sought fame or personal gain. His only desire seemed to be to impart the lessons he had learned from a life lived so long ago. The case of Daniel Miller, the boy who claimed to be George Washington, forces us to confront the most profound questions of existence. What is the nature of consciousness? Does the soul truly transcend the boundaries of life and death? Are we merely individuals living a single linear existence, or are we part of a grander cyclical journey carrying the echoes of past lives within us? The very fabric of our understanding of reality was stretched, perhaps even torn, by a child's impossible memories. What do you think? Could this child truly be the reincarnation of George Washington? Comment below and subscribe for more chilling cases.